People like Mark Prensky and dozens of marketers, market researchers, thought leaders, buzzword is, now have made lots of money from coming up, literally inventing terms like digital native, like Generation X, Y, Z, millennials. Many of these terms, of course, focus on young people's relationship with technology. And going back to the previous module, we now know why. Because new media and new people, literally children, teenagers, are both able to be used as kind of utopian and dystopian visions for how society might progress and how things might turn out in the future. So the term digital native and the idea that social media has given us a group of people who, for somehow and some reason, most likely simply because they were born into using digital technologies and social media, are somehow different. They think differently, they act differently, they behave differently. And the flip side of Prensky's term digital native is old people such as myself who are referred to as digital immigrants. So we weren't born into using digital technologies. The advent of the internet, the advent of social media were kind of big things that oldies such as myself had to learn to adapt to, because we weren't innately or inherently geared towards that way of thinking. Now, we know that there are problems associated with terms like digital native if we apply the media panic argument from last week. We understand that these terms and the ease with which they get thrown around in public discourse it's more about cultural baggage. It's more about presenting visions of the future than about young people themselves. Because one of the realities of social media use, regardless of whether you are young or old, is that it is still going to be driven by underlying structural factors. So all of those arguments about censorship, about information poverty, are going to apply regardless of age. So if you are an Indigenous person, you are less likely to use social media. If you are a person living in a regional part of Australia, you're less likely to use social media. If you are from a lower socioeconomic bracket, you're less likely to use social media. All of those kind of underlying structural factors still apply. So we need to be careful about using these sort of blanket terms like digital native when describing young people and their social media use. We need to bear in mind that it's more about projecting a vision of the future onto young people, and it's a convenient form of shorthand for marketers, market researchers, and those sorts of people whose job it is to peddle kind of glib caricatures and phrases that attempt to describe an entire demographic or generation. These terms are also really divisive and exclusionary. So if you go back to Prensky's quote, which is at the start of this section of the module, if you accept his idea that all of you, or the vast majority of you, based on your age, are somehow tuned differently and old ways of learning no longer apply, then it also means that my job is in many ways redundant. And of course, we're doing things a little bit differently. And you're learning differently to how you learned, even 5, 10 years ago, thanks to digital media. But setting up that binary division between the digital native and the digital immigrant gives young people too much power, because it ignores all those structural factors that influence social media use. And it gives older people too little power, because it overestimates the difficulty of using social media platforms. And that's one of the other things that we need to bear in mind. Social media platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, are designed to be used. They are designed to be social. So it is in the best interests of all of the platform developers to make platforms as simple to use as possible. So you are not digital natives, and I and older people, we are not digital immigrants. We are all wrapped up and participating in the social and cultural changes associated with technology together. We do it in different ways, but as this infographic demonstrates, while it is true that younger people tend to be heavier users of social media, in those older age brackets, we are seeing more and more prevalent use. And that kind of tipping point, that 40 to 49-year-old category, which is 86%, as that demographic gets older, we will probably see increasingly older people, those other age brackets, spiking in terms of social media use as well. So eventually the 65-year-olds plus will, more than half of that demographic will eventually start to use social media on a regular basis, and it will increasingly, move towards higher levels of access.